Everyone. I'd like to invite everybody who isn't on camera to join the discussion. Feel free to turn your camera on. This program is intended really to be a group discussion, and I would love to see everybody who's here with us today and invite everybody to participate. I want to just make sure we have everybody on to kick off the program. We have Sharon and Simone. I don't see yet joining the call. But while we're waiting for Simone, I'll just kick it off and give a little bit of an introduction and some information about Caleb and the roundtable programs, and we will see everybody as they come on. So I would like to say hi to everybody. My name is Thomas Canavan. I'm the Executive Director for the National Law Enforcement Museum. And we are here today to kick off another roundtable program. The roundtable programs are a signature program of the Caleb Network. Caleb stands for the Community Alliances and Law Enforcement Bulletin. And we started Caleb almost a year ago now, actually, at the National Law Enforcement Museum, along with our partners who supported this initiative through an advisory board, as well as our sponsors at DuPont and Thomson Reuters. And so far, we're up to almost 250 members within Caleb. And we have about 17 organizations that contribute within the Caleb Resource Center. And so why that's significant is that we really wanted Caleb to be a place that doesn't yet really exist throughout the country, which is a social network for people who are committed to law enforcement and community relationships, and also discussing issues within those relationships and working on ways to improve public safety overall. So within Caleb, as I mentioned, we have this resource center, which is a really important place where anybody can work with us to upload white papers, links, videos, best practices that are happening around the country that could be valuable to other people in other communities. And so we're really excited about Caleb. We're excited about the roundtables. We designed them specifically to be this place where we could have discussions and we could talk about innovative programs that are happening around the country and get other people's perspectives on it. And so one of those programs is LEAD. It is the Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion program. And this is part 2 of that discussion. Part 1, we were introduced to LEAD, and part 2 is going to dive a little bit deeper. One of the really great things about this program and really this initiative is the opportunity to bring law enforcement officers together to talk about the value of some of these programs. And I think sometimes a lot of programs are out there. This is a great idea. This is a great idea. And, you know, let's take the opportunity to really talk about, you know, if it's a great idea, how can we implement it in more places? And if there are challenges, how can we overcome those challenges? So with that said, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I'm hoping that this program is one of the most productive 60 minutes of your day. We will end promptly at 4 p.m. I know everybody has a lot of important work to do, so we're going to kick it off. I'd like to introduce our kind of 3 principles for this discussion that are going to provide the background, and that is Sharon Sayles Belton, former mayor of Minneapolis and vice president of strategic partnerships and alliances at Thomson Reuters. Simone Hardeman-Jones, founding executive director of GreenLight Fund Twin Cities, and retired Chief Brendan Cox, director of policing strategies at the LEAD National Support Bureau. And also joined with us are a few officers that are running LEAD in other towns across the country: Sergeant Ben Peterson, Deputy Eugene Gaines, and Inspector Jose Gomez, I think, is going to try to join us. He had another meeting right now. So we're going to hear a little bit about from everybody that I just named and kind of their role within the program. And then we're going to open it up to discussion and question and answers. So with that said, I'd like to invite Chief Cox to open it up. Tell us a little bit about your background, your role within LEAD, and your relationship to Sharon and Simone.
Thanks, Thomas. Appreciate that. So my name is Brendan Cox, as Thomas said, and I am currently the Director of Policing Strategies for the LEAD Support Bureau. And I've been with the Bureau for a bit over 5 years now. And in my role as Director of Policing Strategies, it's my job to help provide technical assistance to the jurisdictions around the world that are looking to implement LEAD. And basically, we work with folks from the moment they want to know a little bit more about what this pre-arrest diversion initiative is, all the way through folks who are operating and are looking for that guidance as they come along the way. I started out knowing about LEAD and finding about LEAD when I was an assistant chief with the Albany Police Department. And I was lucky enough to become chief there when we implemented it. Bob Sears, who's on the line here today, was my deputy chief when we got it off the ground in Albany. And I think that, folks find their way to LEAD for a lot of different reasons. But LEAD was started in Seattle because of racial disparities within the criminal legal system, the substance use. And in Albany, we had a very similar situation. We had historic reduction in criminal activity, but we had really horrific relationships with our community, especially our community of color. We had three specific neighborhoods that we were an occupying force for much of the 2000s, and that's what we were looked upon. We had a group of officers that, at the direction of the command staff, not their fault, they were put into those three neighborhoods and basically told to stop crime. And that's what they did. They did stop crime. But what they didn't do, and what we did not do as management, was build relationships. And we eventually had a homicide of a college student, and it was a white college student. And our chief at the time ultimately made a comment internally to another command staff member that homicide meant more than what our usual homicides look like, which were usually young Black men. And it didn't say it in quite that nice fashion that I said, which was not nice either. But ultimately, that led to that chief leaving, and it led to a few of us that were still sitting in a place where we wanted to make a difference, and we wanted to make sure that, first of all, we had a relationship with the community, and second of all, the men and women of the department had some leadership and actually felt satisfaction in their job, because we heard the men and women of the department say they wanted to do this job, they wanted satisfaction. And we heard the community saying to us, like, it's great that you tell us that the crime rates are down, but basically we don't really like you. You're not doing a job that we want you to do. So we decided that instead of continuing to have poor relationships with the community, and in turn really poor relationships with our officers, because if we were not providing them an atmosphere to really prosper in, we weren't doing them any good either. So we started to really build relationships with the community. And one of the key relationships we built was with Dr. Alice Green, who's the executive director of the Center for Law and Justice in Albany. And she had started that agency in response to a police killing in the 1980s. And when we sat down, we said, we realized we have to do things a little bit differently. And one of the things we talked about was the harm that was done throughout most of my career, and even before my career started, around really the war on drugs and how we handled drug arrests, and the fact that there were some unintended consequences, and certainly by others, intended consequences of making those arrests and taking people away from their families. And the things that got attached to not just arresting somebody and punishing that one individual, it wasn't just about that sentence, but it was about all the things that happened on top of that, and especially to families and to housing and to employment and all the other pieces. And we realized when we started to look at the public safety issues that we actually weren't really making the public much safer by continuing to make those arrests. And when it came to lower level crimes, we in fact weren't really making much of a difference when it came to repeat offenders who had unmet behavioral health needs or were living in poverty or homeless. And those were the root cause of the issues, much like what Seattle had found. So when Dr. Green said to us, hey, there's this initiative out of Seattle, and they're going to do a presentation. They were doing a presentation in Open Society Foundation. So Albany's about 150 miles away from New York City where they're doing the presentation. It made all the sense in the world for us to go to New York and see that. So once we saw that presentation, we knew this is what we needed to do. And we ultimately got off the ground and did that. Shortly after Albany got going, what was happening to Seattle is they were getting their doors knocked down to find out what it is they were doing and how this was different, including by Albany, and certainly Mayor Belton was one of those people as well, were those folks that saying, hey, what are you guys doing? So there was a recognition by Seattle that there needed to be a group of people whose full-time jobs it was to provide technical assistance. So the Lead Support Bureau was born right around 2015, late 2015, early 2016, to bring dedicated staff to be able to do this, because we started in April 2016 and we were the third jurisdiction in the country to start. We're now up to 75 jurisdictions in the country, and I'm in London right now as we work with some folks in the UK to see about bringing Lead here. So I was given the opportunity to come in and see about doing this, being the law enforcement liaison. And I was lucky enough to take this job. So that's what landed me here to now work with Simone and with Mayor Belton on what can be done in Minneapolis. And I want to say that much like in Albany, where Dr. Green was that force to help bring Lead to Albany, Mayor Belton and Simone and others in the community that have said, hey, we're not going to just let Lead go. Folks could have turned around a couple of years ago when an application was made to the federal government for funding that got turned down and said, oh, well, it didn't work. But instead, GreenLight, Mayor Belton have advocated and said, no, we're going to make this work. So the community and advocates and folks that know that things need to change have said, we're going to do this work. We're going to stop arresting folks for crimes that are driven by mental health, driven by substance use disorders, driven by poverty and homelessness. And we're going to do something different. We're going to bring people to case managers who are going to work with people on a long-term basis that's going to recognize the principles of harm reduction and recognize that when we build trust and relationships with those folks, we're going to actually be able to get to the root cause of why they're ultimately in the position they're in and committing crimes, things that the criminal legal system could never address. It has never been set up to do that. And recognizing that when we meet people where they're at, we can actually make a big difference. And we can increase public safety, because ultimately this is a public health response to public safety, because we can never have a one approach method to public safety. Arresting people, prosecuting and incarcerating people, that's not always going to provide public safety. And sometimes it's actually going to create less safety. And I think we've seen that happen when it comes to substance use, mental health, and poverty. Those aren't things that we should be prosecuting people over. We should be able to build relationships, and that's what Lead looks to do. So I'll leave that there, but ultimately, I think that you guys have a great community there that's really stood up with GreenLight, the mayor, and said, let's get this work done.
And Sharon, do you have anything that you want to add?
I was going to defer to Simone, because Simone has been leading the on-the-ground effort to bring, as Brendan said, all of the partners together so that this collaboration can work. So Simone, why don't you talk a little bit about how you made that happen?
Sure, thank you. And thanks for having me here today. So just a little bit of background or context on GreenLight Fund Twin Cities. GreenLight is a nonprofit organization that is also a grant maker. And we seek to do two sort of things. One, we identify our area of focus through by engaging with and in community to understand what's needed and how we can respond to that through GreenLight Fund. And so through our process of community engagement, we really honed in on public and community safety as a top priority and need. The second sort of key level thing you should know about GreenLight is we invest in models, programs, organizations that have evidence of impact and success in other parts of the country. And so when we started looking around and thinking about what does that, how can we have an impact in public safety in specifically on the Lake Street corridor of Minneapolis, where we sort of wanted to focus. We discovered the LEAD program. And I think at the time when we first started talking to Brendan and the team, you were operating in 60 cities across the country. Now I heard Brendan say 75 cities. So I need to get my talking points updated. But we just found that this model has had impact and evidence of success all over the country, and now all over the world. And so we were really excited to learn about it, and also really excited about how much the LEAD program is rooted in community. Brendan and his team always say LEAD is not owned by one single stakeholder. It is owned by the community. And that meant for us at GreenLight that if we were going to help bring this program, this opportunity in, we needed the support and partnership of our community to make this implementation successful. And so we spent several months, in particular a week in August, where Brendan and the team came down and we met with community stakeholders, we met with council members, we met with the mayor's office, we met with the faith-based community, the business community, to really listen, learn, share more about LEAD, understand what they're looking for, what they were looking for in a response to public safety. And what we really heard was that the community is really excited and anxious to be a part of the solution, and wanted to, and that's what really attracted them and excited them about LEAD, because through the community referral process of the LEAD program, it will allow the community members to really take part in helping to create change in the community that they care about, business owners who have longed for other opportunities to help folks that they see in the community who they know need mental health support or resources, and not necessarily interaction with the legal system, the justice system, or law enforcement. And so we're really excited to be coming together with the community members to really provide an alternative approach to support that the LEAD program offers. I'll pause there.
One of the things that I just say is that a couple of things that I love about today's conversation. First, that Caleb is creating this opportunity for all of us to get together, because the truth of the matter is that they're trying to get all the best practices, out into the public square, so that, we don't all, kind of struggle with trying to figure out what to do. If there's some best practices out there, we should all be learning from each other. That's exactly what the GreenLight Fund also brought, I think, to the city of Minneapolis. They did the research on what are some of the best practices around public safety and some of the other topics that were surfaced in the community conversations. It was clear, of course, given everything that we've been through in the city of Minneapolis in the last couple of years, that public safety was going to be, on the top of the list. And it also made sense to a lot of people here that the Lake Street corridor, which is, again, that corridor that was impacted by the civil unrest after the murder of George Floyd. I mean, that we were a community that was just seriously, in need of a lift, of some hope. And GreenLight gave us that hope, and specifically the LEAD program, which was been so successful in so many other cities, made sense for us to kind of look through, sort out, and figure out how we could make it work for us in Minneapolis. I want to just underscore one point that may have been missed here. I haven't been the mayor of the city of Minneapolis since 2001, but what we commonly say as mayors, once a mayor, always a mayor, right? So I love my city, and when Simone and Brendan created this opportunity for a person like me to get involved in this effort, it made sense, that I would step up to the plate. I'm in the private sector now, but I will also tell you that the private sector is really interested and committed in ensuring that the communities where they operate, are safe and secure. They can't do business effectively unless they're living in a city where people feel safe. They won't get employees staying working for their companies if people don't feel safe. There's so many reasons for the private sector to come together with law enforcement and the community to try to get a handle on these issues associated with crime and poverty. We all know about the revolving door of the criminal justice system. And what I'm going to just tell you is it's squeaking too loud, and it's been doing it for too many years. And we have the opportunity through this LEAD program to unravel that and get people into the programs and services that they need so that they stop, undermining the quality of life in the communities where, they're located. And we can help them, address whatever their demons are so that they can live a prosperous life. I mean, I think some of them want that for themselves. And if we can help them, get there, all the better for, for everyone. And that's the goal here. I will just also share this with you. The reason I'm so passionate about this is that, again, as a young advocate, I represented Lake Street on the Minneapolis City Council. I know firsthand that we have been dealing and struggling with these problems for well over 40 years. And it's time to do something different. LEAD is giving us that opportunity to do something different. And the experiences that many of you all have had in other cities, we can leverage that so that we can have some success. That's what we're hoping for.
Thank you, Sharon and Simone, for that perspective. I want to have one question to open it up a little bit. And I don't know if it's Brendan, Sharon, or Simone who can respond to this, but when you all brought the idea of LEAD to Minneapolis, what was the response from the law enforcement officers there?
I think I can speak to that a little bit, and Brendan, you can too. We were both sort of a part of and led some of those initial meetings and conversations. I think the biggest takeaway I had from that first initial meeting or conversation about LEAD, I think there was already some familiarity with the program because it had been looked into for a couple of years before, and I think the city wasn't able to pursue it at that time. But I think the biggest, reaction was, this will help us tremendously with our, our sort of ranks are sort of depleting. We need support, we need help. We have a lot of priorities that we need to be addressing. And we can't always respond to every single thing, especially those which LEAD seeks to address, which are the low-level offenses truly in need of mental health supports or other types of resources. And I think it was sort of a welcome excitement hearing about the LEAD program, because it offers an alternative that might help I think the Minneapolis Police Department really focus on other priorities instead of sort of trying to respond to everything at once. But Brendan, you should offer some more context there too.
Yeah, it was, we had some really good conversations. So as LEAD has evolved, we've talked at the Bureau for a while about making sure that we had community input and community advocacy and the community at the table. But after George Floyd was murdered, we recognized we really needed to step things up and to really make an enhancement onto how people could get into LEAD. Law enforcement's always been the gatekeeper to LEAD, and there'll always be a part of LEAD that law enforcement is the gatekeeper on. But we started what we call now, Let Everyone Advance with Dignity, which is a third way to get into LEAD, which is a true community referral, where community members, whether it's a neighborhood association person, business person, church member, pastor, can call the project manager directly and say, hey, I've got this individual, they're having contact with the police, store owner, I've got somebody shoplifting. I've known this guy for a long time. I know they've got some issues going on. I don't want to call the police. I'd rather have the lead caseworker take this on. So that direct input from the community to get folks into LEAD. And we know that it's going to be successful. And there's been some sites, other sites, Seattle kicked this off, and there's a bunch of other places that have started to do this. But the thing we saw with the Minneapolis police, both from a higher level command to line level folks that came in and we spoke to, that was the biggest thing that they had an interest in, was this recognition that this can be a true partnership with the community, and it can really help them out in a number of ways, certainly reducing calls for service, but also that recognition that the police don't have to do everything. I think that sometimes in law enforcement, and I remember doing it myself as a chief, you think you got to take everything on, and that somehow we have all the answers. I think there was a real recognition there that, we don't have to have all the answers. It's okay to ask for help, and it's okay to have the community be that partner. That's the way it's supposed to be. I mean, public safety is not about just the police taking it on, and it's certainly not just about the community taking it on. It's about both taking it on together as partners and figuring out how to do it together. So it was really, for myself and my colleagues at the Bureau, we were really happy when that meeting ended, to just sit back and say, like, wow, they just embraced community referrals. And that's not always an easy discussion with law enforcement. We've seen more people embrace it than that have not, but just right off the bat to be like, we want to see community referrals come in because we know that it would help out, and it would help out with the community, it would help with us. And we also know that we certainly know that with the struggles in those relationships, this can help mend some of those struggles as well. That when we're all on the same page and we all agree that the folks committing these low-level offenses don't need to be arrested, and we have those avenues and we all support those avenues so they don't, I think that helps to mend some of those relationships as well. I know that they mended some for me and all.
And I'll just add, I think that meeting that Brandon and I are referring to really confirmed for me that this was the lead model and program was sort of a win-win for both law enforcement as well as the community.
You know what, Thomas, I just was going to throw this out. People are really anxious right now for LEAD to actually get started. And the law enforcement officers that I've talked to in Minneapolis, they're just kind of waiting with bated breath, if you will, because, the frustration that they have is that every time there's a problem, they're the ones that are called to the situation to deal with it. And they understand that they're not always the most equipped to do it. And they love the idea, at least the ones that have talked to me, they love the idea that there could be somebody else that they can reach out to in the community that can actually take on the behaviors associated with the individual that the public is calling on. Some of these people, they're calling on them every other day, and the police are just not the right solution. But if they can help that individual get to the people that can help him or her, that's a good thing. So again, I think people are in Minneapolis, on the South Side. I think they're excited about this program launching.
Thank you. Great to hear there's anticipation for LEAD. So we invited a couple officers here today to talk about their perspective with the program, and we have Sergeant Peterson with us. And Sergeant, if I could just ask you to tell us a little bit about your involvement and your perspective on this program.
Of course. So I was fortunate enough to be part of the team that was responsible for helping create and launch LEAD in APD in 2016. And we're lucky to have supportive command staff at the time. So we had, Chief Cox and then Chief Sears, who really let us kind of make LEAD our own thing. One of the things that we did within Albany was once we realized this is something we're going to do, we put together a team, a really diverse team, a different cross-section of units, longevity within the department, personalities, and we came up with how we were going to do LEAD in Albany, and we were going to make it make sense and be realistic for officers. One of the biggest things we talked about was we wanted LEAD to be easier than making an arrest, because human nature is people take the path of least resistance. So if an arrest takes an hour and lead takes an hour and a half, people were going to still make the arrests. So we had a practical policy that made sense. We made sure that it was wide ranging, so we can have a lot of different charges all throughout the city eligible for diversion. And we were adaptable. One of the things we learned early on was we were going to need to be able to change our policy up as we went, because we ran into barriers fairly quickly when it came to making diversions. The example that comes to mind is we used to bring everyone down to a room right off of our booking facility for lead diversions. Within the first couple of months, we realized we didn't need to do that. We can hand them right off to the case managers right on the street. And that saved us even more time when making diversions. And, it really helped us get buy-in with the other officers. One of the things that I would definitely recommend to any agency that's going to start a lead program is put together that team, that good cross-section of officers that are informal leaders and respected within the department, because those are going to be your sales team. Those are going to be the guys that you're going to give a lot more training to. You're going to make sure that they understand what the mission is and how lead works. And they're going to bring it back to the squads and to their peers, and they're going to help sell it. I say sell it. Unfortunately, that's how it is. It's a cultural change. It's a cultural shift for law enforcement to start valuing lead diversions as much as we do arrests. And that's something that we're constantly working on. We have to keep it in the front of officers' brains that lead is just as important and just as valuable as making a good grab, as they say.
Great, thank you. I don't know if the inspector was able to join us or not.
I think I saw him on.
Well, what we can do at this time is just open it up for questions from anybody in the audience, or Chief Cox, if you want to dive in, at any point into a little bit more of the details, some of the nuts and bolts about starting lead within a law enforcement department, that would be great.
I do see Inspector Gomez on. I think he just came
Good.
on mute.
Good afternoon. Can everybody hear me?
Yeah, hello.
Yeah, I apologize. I'm on Bluetooth. I was just leaving another meeting and so joining. I've been on a little bit. No, I'm really excited. I just heard about the program last week, and yeah, obviously as law enforcement, I mean, we're struggling with staffing amongst one of the issues, and looking at this program and how can it assist us in the public safety factor is huge. I've only been in my role for, I don't know, about 2 months maybe, and met a lot of business owners on Lake Street, and specifically with the Latino businesses who I have a strong relationship with. And yeah, I mean, they're having major issues, not with, necessarily shootings or assaults, but it's a lot of these low-level offenses that are mostly probably underlying issues are addiction, mental health, homelessness. I know right now we have a encampment that's, right on the corridor, like 2900 block of 5th, which is right off of Lake Street. And, they just go into the businesses and will, shoplift, just kind of cause a disturbance. And, if a case worker can assist and help on that, that's huge. I think partnerships are great. And I think, yeah, I'm totally looking forward to how we can participate in this program.
Awesome.
I don't know if there's any questions that people have of myself.
Yeah, are there any questions out there so far? No, if not, Chief Cox, if you could, walk us through a little bit of some of the implementation of lead, and any challenges that officers face, or like Sergeant Peters had alluded, some of the the right people that you want to get together, what's needed to make this happen.
Absolutely. So, I think one of the things I want to touch on is that just kind of how we've grown in LEAD and how we try to keep the core principles of LEAD in place, but we also try to recognize that each jurisdiction is its own. So we don't try to come in and tell folks in Minneapolis, this is what Seattle did, or this is what Albany did, and you have to do it this way, or else you're not doing LEAD. So when we look at LEAD, we try to look at the core principles of LEAD to recognize that, one, we're doing pre-arrest, pre-booking diversion. So we're never filing charges. So we're always doing it before the arrest, even though we're talking about folks that are prolific offenders. So we're talking about folks that have been arrested a lot before. We're talking about folks that have been through the system, and now we're looking to take them out of the system. And then we're talking about the fact that we are doing a warm handoff to that case manager, and that case manager is going to work with them from that harm reduction standpoint. And for law enforcement, I think this is one of the barriers, is that harm reduction is counterintuitive. That harm reduction is something that doesn't seem to make sense until we sit down and really start talking about it, and until we start getting some real understanding of examples, like until there's something in front of us and we're like, oh, that's what we're going to do with that person. And that's what it means when we meet them where they're at, literally and figuratively. That's what it means when the case manager is not going to sit in an office and think that this person that's been living on the street for 10 years, the very folks that the inspector was just talking about, they're not going to make it into the case manager's office. So the case manager is actually going to go meet them wherever it is that they may be, wherever their tent is, wherever anything else is. And that we're going to have this really person-centered approach. And we're going to listen to what that person says they're ready to do and move from there. And it's really different because in the policing world, like we're originally told as we get hired and as we go through police academies, that we're going to change people by coercing and punishing them. That is really what the system is supposed to be, rehabilitative. But I think we all learn kind of quickly that it really just stops people from committing crimes while they're in and doesn't really do much rehabilitating at all. So now what we're trying to do is say, okay, we're not going to punish and we're not going to coerce, but instead we're going to meet that person and have person-centered goals and person-centered approach. So a case manager is really going to try to break through and try to figure out what is it that's happening with this person. And that's going to take some time. That's not going to happen overnight. And that's why we don't have time limits. So a lot of us are used to having programs and initiatives that say, this person has 30 days to do A, B, and C. And if they do that in the 30 days, then they graduate and we're all set. And LEAD doesn't work that way. LEAD says, we're going to work with that person on their timetable. And even though we want to see that change happen miraculously overnight, that's not how that works. Like we don't change that way. And if we look at our own lives, especially if we look at our own problematic behavior, because we all have problematic behavior, we just don't all admit that. We all have things in our lives that we're not ready to change. That's how people change. And when we look at that and we think about it and we really work through that, I think we understand that more. So we take that basis of what we're looking at and we bring that to that jurisdiction. And when LEAD started, the charges were around possession of controlled substances, sex work, and Sayles that were just for sustenance. So Sayles were just for folks that were really just trying to support their addiction. And LEAD's grown from there. So folks have recognized in other jurisdictions, and now in our Seattle, which is still where things have started and where they've continued, but folks have realized that we can grow from here. So that the recognition that we can look at other crimes, we can look at shoplifting. Shoplifting works really well because we know the things that drive shoplifting have to do with substance use, have to do with poverty, and we can make diversions. We don't have to make arrests there. Other low-level offenses, trespassing. We know folks go into abandoned houses many times to use drugs. Again, no reason to arrest those folks when we can actually get them services. So we know there are other crimes to use. I want to talk a little bit about, and I'm checking to see too if Gene Gaines is on. I'm looking at my phones to see if he got back to me, just in case. But the structure of LEAD includes this policy coordinated group that acts as kind of the board of directors. So LEAD is not owned by anybody. And that's really important, as we talked in the beginning, because it is this collaborative approach. But because we have that collaborative approach, we also have a collaborative approach to problem solving. And the operational folks have what we call an operational work group. And every 2 weeks, there's a project manager in each jurisdiction that oversees the day-to-day operations. And they work with both the policy level folks and they work with the operational folks. And at that operational work group meeting that happens every 2 weeks, they hold a meeting that includes the case managers, the police officers, folks from the district attorney's office, state's attorney's office, folks from the public defender's office, and many times other service providers. And they do a couple of things there. One of them is that they have a session where the case managers talk about how folks are doing that have been the participants. So they give feedback as to what's going on, and folks are able to help problem solve. But the other piece that they do is that they make sure the system doesn't work against how those individuals are doing. So if somebody's got a bunch of other cases that are still at the district attorney's office, folks can talk about planning out what should happen with those cases so we don't miss opportunities to get people help. So if somebody's about to get into housing or about to get into treatment, we don't send them away for 30 days in county jail because of an old case. So we make sure we have a more coordinated approach. And I see there's a few hands up, so I'm going to leave it at that. And I might come back to Ben, if you don't mind thinking about it for a moment, Ben, to just kind of give some examples of how you guys have been able to work through work groups, because Albany does a really fantastic job at the operational work group of having case managers and officers and the district attorney's office and public defender office work in some amazing capacity to work through some of those problems. So I'm just going to key Ben up to think about that while we get to these questions.
Hey, Brendan, why don't we go to Troy first?
Thank you, appreciate that. Maybe this question goes to the chief. I mean, I've certainly had some experience working with different sort of diversions, whether it's juvenile diversion or jail diversion and trauma recovery programs, but how does this lead model sort of either differ or interface with the Memphis model of crisis intervention teams, or CIT? How do those two either fit together, or are they completely independent of each other?
So while they're independent, we recommend that there be coordination between the two. So the major difference is that the CIT initiative is looking at people that are more in a mental health crisis or have mental health issues happening, but aren't necessarily committing crimes. Whereas LEAD is responding to criminal activity and looking at what the factors are that are causing that criminal activity. So one of the factors might be that the person has a mental health issue that's creating that opportunity for a crime. That's the cause of it. So they're making that diversion, recognizing that. So it's really just the nuance between, is it a mental health issue with no criminal action attached, or has there been a crime that's been committed and the person's in the system and it appears that there's a mental health issue attached to why that's happening. So one of the things we recommend to folks, so that way there can be discussions and folks can make sure, because there is going to be some crossover, is that folks at the CIT level sit at that operation work group meeting, so there's coordination. And there's nothing ever wrong with that time saying that, hey, this person might not be an appropriate lead participant. Let's have CIT address that, because CIT has the resources to address somebody that hasn't been caught up in the system, because we also don't want to net widen. So if the person doesn't have a bunch of cases that have happened before, they don't have a big criminal history, we might not want them in lead. We might actually want to remove them and have other appropriate services happen. Or CIT might be like, hey, this person's been arrested 50 times for substance use. Clearly they have a mental health issue, but we think a harm reduction approach would be more appropriate. The same thing could happen. There could be a referral across the board that way.
Sharon, did you want to go next?
Well, thanks. My question is actually for Ben Peterson from Albany. And I was just curious about whether or not you launched your program citywide, or if it started in a particular neighborhood or section of the city.
Thanks for that question. One of the things that we made a point to do in Albany was it was citywide. We didn't want to make it exclusive to certain neighborhoods. And then we also wanted to make sure that it was 24/7. So we didn't have any red light, green light days. And we were fortunate, we did have some fears that we were going to get overwhelmed by the amount of diversions, and we were lucky not to have that happen to us. But it's definitely something to keep in mind. I mean, Albany's, we have about 100,000 people, 20 square miles. So we're not the biggest city, we're a decent sized city, and we didn't overwhelm our case managers right away. And yeah, it worked out.
Thank you.
This question isn't for anybody in particular, but for anybody who would like to speak up, who's been involved in implementing this program. I'm curious about the general public response. There was a question earlier about law enforcement specific response to initiating the LEAD program, but I'm curious about the general public, if there have been situations you've seen where the whole community is immediately on board, they're engaged, they're excited, or are there situations where it's called into question by the general public? Are there situations where people have said that it's law enforcement trying to push work off on somebody else, and maybe how you've responded to public engagement, either building on enthusiasm or responding to questions?
I can jump first, and then Simone, if you want to talk a little bit about Simone, Mayor, if you always want to talk about Minneapolis specific. So we definitely recommend that there is a bunch of community engagement around implementing LEAD. We think that's really important. And one of the structures that we recommend to implement with LEAD is what we call a community leadership team. And a community leadership team is really getting folks from neighborhood associations, getting folks from the business world, getting folks with lived experience together and having them really form an independent group of individuals that can help do a couple of things. One is to help provide accountability and transparency for the LEAD initiative itself, for those policy members. So we can, number one, share policies with them. We can share what's happening, and they can give us really honest feedback that we sometimes need, especially from lived experience folks, from getting that. And then the other thing that they can do is help us with that community engagement. So we are getting to the right people. We're getting to everybody. I mean, I think that's important, but we also want to make sure we get to everybody for a few reasons. One, we want the community to embrace this. Two, we also want to make sure that the folks we're going to look to divert, to offer services for, actually accept. I have no problem saying that the folks that we deal with, they're not always the most trusting of police. And they might just be like, I don't really know what you're offering me. I don't know that I'm going to say yes, because I don't trust you at this moment. So we want folks to recognize what it is they're being offered and know that they're not being offered. There's no strings attached. Like, we don't ask for information from somebody when we give them LEAD. Like, we don't say, you can have LEAD if you tell us about a drug dealer. No, this is about just getting somebody help. So we want to make sure we get that word out. There are naysayers from the community on both ends. There are some people that are going to be like, how dare you not arrest somebody that's committed a crime? I had that question posed to me a number of times, or that statement, I should say, posed to me a number of times at community meetings when we talked about LEAD. And most of the time, community members stood up before I ever had to say anything and said, well, this is one of the things we've asked the chief and we've asked the city not to do anymore. We've asked them to do something different. And some of those community members, one of them was a business owner, came up to me afterwards, 6 months down the road, and said, hey, I just want to say thank you. That actually did work. And I have seen improvement. Some of them still shook their head and were like, I can't believe you're not enforcing the law. So not everybody is on board, but I think it is really important to have a full engagement of the community. And I think at all levels. So like, we had an engagement with higher level businesses. Ben did a fantastic job as an officer at that time, going to the businesses in his zone and talking to the loss prevention officers about LEAD to make sure that we could get the buy-in from the line level people at the stores to say no prosecution on diversions for shoplifting. So it also has to be done at like all levels and all different places. And some people like Ben, like I said, he's like, hey, I got to get to the loss prevention officers. Let's make sure we get that audience as well. So I'll stop there and let Simone or the mayor talk about Minneapolis a little bit.
Yeah, thanks, Brendan. I think I mentioned that really our decision at GreenLight to really decide to invest funds into bringing the LEAD program into the community was based on community engagement and feedback and conversations. And as Brendan said, yes, there were some who, questioned or still continue to try to wrap their head around the LEAD model and how it will work and what that will look like. But I think overwhelmingly, we heard from community, we need something. This seems like the right solution we want to be a part of. The other piece I will add is, or the other question from community that I think came up was, how is this different from many of the other initiatives run by the city or other organizations? How will this be different? And I think one of the things that we really honed in on was, this is really, because our work and bringing in the LEAD model is really supported in partnership with the city attorney's office in Minneapolis. And the city attorney's office has been able to say, this is the type of LEAD is the type of program we've been looking for. It's an opportunity to do this work outside of the system. We have so many programs that already exist within the system. They have different legal programs, court programs, there's gun violence prevention programs, and you name it. But they really saw LEAD as a model and an opportunity that could truly additive to the programs that already exist, and that can respond in our community, and an opportunity to do work differently and outside of the traditional system. And so I think being able to share that with community members as we talked about this opportunity, I also think helped make a big difference. I don't mean to say that there are still not questions or concerns, of people that we will continue to bring along the way. And I'm excited also to get the community leadership team that Brendan talked about up and off the ground. We already have a long list of potential members of that who I think are going to be key stakeholders in seeing this work move forward.
I'll just add one other thing to the discussion that you heard from Brendan and Simone, and that is to say that maybe 20 years ago, the county of Hennepin tried to put a whole host of services that they provided on Lake Street to try to address some of these issues. But that was really what the problem was. It was just the county doing it, and it wasn't connected to the rest of the community. What's different with the LEAD model, which I think gives people more hope that it will have a better outcome, is that it's actually a collaboration with the community and community-based nonprofits who have relationships with the very individuals whose behaviors are trying to be corrected through the diversion model. And so I think there are a lot more people that are hopeful that this collaboration between local government and the community and the private sector is the right model. And of course, the proof, as they say, is in the pudding. But there are a lot more folks, I think, that are optimistic about what this could mean for our community, because we've tried a lot of things over the years. There's a lot of frustration out there in the community, to be sure, but at the end of the day, we want to be able to live in a safe community and be able to go to Lake Street, which is our primary commercial corridor, and support the businesses and get access to the goods and services that we need. So maybe this is the model that's going to work for us. We certainly hope so. And again, we're trying to learn from other communities across the country, how well it's worked for them, where their problems are, so that we can learn from them and not have to repeat them.
So we're getting close to 4 o'clock. I promised everybody 60 minutes. And I just had one question. So from kind of a practical standpoint, I know that so far you all have had some really good data around reduction in recidivism. And I'm just curious for those who lead doesn't work, right? I know you talked about not having a timetable, which I think is really interesting. But for that, for that individual who keeps committing the same level, or the same low level offense, repeatedly, and just kind of isn't taking to the opportunity that you all are trying to provide, what's the next step for that person? How do you determine that, all right, at some point where this isn't working?
Hey, Brendan. Oh.
You want, Gene? If you want to take that, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, I apologize to everybody. The one day it rains in California, California went crazy. So I apologize with some equipment issues and emergency pops up. This is Eugene Gaines from LA County Sheriff's, and I've been participating in LEAD for about 3 years now, and we started from the ground up. Once again, I apologize for being late. But to answer that question is, we've enrolled individuals in the LEAD program, and they started off doing good, and then they took a step back, and unfortunately they caught new cases with the court systems, and then unfortunately we had to disenroll them. We tried every effort to keep them involved, to offer them opportunities through our case managers who they're assigned to, but unfortunately sometimes law takes over, and then we can only do so much for them when they pick up new cases. And if they get a felony case that's going to put them in custody for a certain period of time, that's an automatic disqualifier. But on the bright side, if they get discharged, we could revisiting enrolling them back into our program.
So who makes that determination? Is that the DA? Is that the courts? That they can't be, that they have to,
Actually, that's through our operational work group. I don't know if you guys discussed about that, but the officers will sit back down with them and discuss that, and then we'll bring it back to the work table with the DA and individuals from our work groups, and we'll discuss about this individual being re-enrolled again, if they're going to be suitable again.
Thank you for that perspective. I think it's good to see the other, talk about the other side of the coin there. So I just want to thank everybody for coming today and for participating in this discussion. Thank you so much, Chief Cox and Sharon and Simone and all the other officers that took the time to be here. The discussion does not have to end here. That is why Caleb is so awesome. If you have not yet joined Caleb, please consider doing so. There's a web-based version. There's a mobile app that you can have on your phone. And we can continue talking about LEAD. We can continue talking about other programs and really sharing links, sharing articles, anything that kind of helps shed perspective on some of these programs that we're trying to implement across the country. So thank you all very much. And I hope to see you at our next roundtable. Have a great afternoon.